Good morning. I want to extend a special greeting today to the residents of Blackstone Valley Rehab Center here in town, formerly known as St. Camillus, who from now on will be joining us online at 10 o'clock Mass every Sunday. So they can be part of our community. So we want to send special greetings to them today. Now, Jesus is still in the temple, as we saw last Sunday. And today, Jesus tells another parable. And like last Sunday, the key image in today's parable is what? The vineyard. That's the image. Now, we heard a story of two sons last weekend. And one says no to the father, but then changes his mind. The other one says yes, but does not go to work in the vineyard. Now, we know that Jesus is talking to the chief priests and the elders of the people, the religious leaders, right after he overturned the tables in the temple and chased the money changers out. And after that, of course, they're all shocked and they come and question his authority. By what authority are you doing this? And who gave you this authority? We said last week that it is a confrontation moment for Jesus. And ultimately, as you read the story, we will see that Jesus will be arrested and then crucified because of this. Now, the chief priests and the elders of the people, they know Jesus is talking about them. They know. Matthew actually tells us in verse 45, they knew he was talking about them. So that's clear. Now, those listening to this parable in Jesus' time would easily have recognized it as an allegory. The land is the Israel, the landowner is God, the servants are the prophets, Jesus is the Son, and the wicked tenants are in fact the religious leaders of his day. So the landowner sends his servants to the tenants to collect the produce. That's what you would do, a few times a year maybe. But the tenants kill one of them, they stone another, and they beat another one. So he sends even larger group of servants. But the same happens to them. So finally, he sends his son thinking, well, they will respect my son. That makes sense. No, they did not. The same thing happens to the son in the story. Now, of course, the story in and of itself is a warning. And notice, and that's probably the biggest irony and twist in the story, that it is the chief priests who tell us what the warning is all about. Jesus asks them the question, what will the owner of the vineyard do to those tenants when he comes? Now the chief priests and the elders implicate themselves, and they say, well, he will put those wretched men to a wretched death and lease his vineyard to other tenants who will give him the produce at the proper times. Now, Jesus agrees with the last part of the statement. That's why he says at the end, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you. But notice that he seems to disagree with the first part of the statement. He does not mention the wretched death. And that's interesting detail in the story. That's not what God desires. That's not what Jesus desires. Now, the parable, of course, is about Jesus' death, and those who listen to the parable would know that. It warns against rejecting God's prophets, but most importantly, maybe, it offers hope that the righteousness and goodness of God will indeed prevail. Ultimately, there is still time. They can change their minds. It's not too late. You know, in some ways, in God's eyes, it's never too late. Just think about that. In God's eyes, it is never too late. We may think, well, it's too late for me, for this reason or that reason. That's not how God thinks. And after telling them the parable, Jesus quotes the Bible. And to be more precise, he quotes the prophet Isaiah. And Matthew tells us, Jesus said to them, "Did you never read in the scriptures? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. By the Lord, this has been done, and it is wonderful in our eyes." Now, a cornerstone is a foundation stone or a setting stone. The first stone that you would take and set in the construction of the masonry foundation. All other stones will be set in reference to the first stone, thus determining the position of the entire structure. That's what behind the image. And of course, Jesus is the rejected cornerstone, the foundation stone, the setting stone, the first one in the construction of the kingdom of God. Other stones, including us, are set in reference to the first stone. But what caught my attention is God's choice. God's choice to use the stone that was rejected to be the first stone. Now imagine how different the church would look if it were built from the stones that are rejected and imperfect. You see, for Jesus, that is what the kingdom of God is all about. It's made up of not just fine or best stones, but also the imperfect and rejected stones. That's why Jesus invited to the kingdom of God whom? The tax collectors and the sinners, Samaritans and the Gentiles, lepers and the possessed, the blind and the lame, the troubled and the suffering, the forgotten and the rejected. In God's kingdom, everything belongs. And that's what Father Richard Raw likes to remind us about all the time. In God's kingdom, somehow everything belongs. That's why Isaiah says, it's wonderful in our eyes. That is the most exciting thing about God's kingdom. That is what's new about God's kingdom. That is what's wonderful about God's kingdom.